All right.
How do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Oh, guilty, but with a real good excuse.
They plead not guilty.
The prosecution is not going to get that man today. No. Because I'm going to get him.
$50,000 bail.
For $50,000.
$2,000 and better throw this jackass out of my court!
And the truth shall set you free.
What, the truth? You can't handle the truth!
Did you say Utes?
Yeah, 2 Utes.
I don't want these two fellas pitching knuckleballs at me at the same time.
I object, Your Honor!
The fair sentence. Do you think they deserve to die, Mr. Haley? Answer the question.
Polly, don't deserve to die!
Yes, they deserve to die, and I hope they burn in hell!
You're just a bunch of lousy, yellow, stinking cowards!
Sir, you're out of order. From the record, Your Honor, it's speculation.
So stricken.
Objection overruled.
Overruled. To overrule.
You are out of order! You're out of order! You're out of order! The whole trial is out of order! They're out of order! That man!
Have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor.
We find the defendant not guilty.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Clay Shaw, not guilty.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Good Lawgic. I am your host, Joe Neerman. This evening, it is my privilege, my pleasure, and to bring on my favorite guest, bar none, and that is my dad, Dr. Yaakov Tzvi Neerman. He, those of you who have never seen him on the show before, this is third or fourth time on the show. My father has a doctorate in medieval Muslim Christian relations, and he's been a professor teaching in colleges for the last 4 decades, Dad?
A little more.
Okay. Yeah, and still teaching today. Yeah, and he's taught me everything that I know and understand about the Middle East, and that's why when I enjoy bringing him on the show in general, and particularly when there are topics relevant to the Middle East, I think that he is the best source that I can possibly bring to my audience, and he has decided to grace our show with his presence again. So, welcome back, Dad.
Thank you.
So, first and foremost, there's a few things that I wanted to get your perspective about the landscape of what's going on in Afghanistan. We haven't spoken since everything really started breaking down. Then, I've spoken with you, but I haven't had you on the show talking about that. And we hear about all these different factions and all these different groups that are in Afghanistan. And to Americans, it's very hard for us to understand the distinction between faction A, faction B. You know, when we went to war in Afghanistan, the Taliban were our enemy. And then when we were clearing out of Afghanistan and desperately trying to get everyone out, and we still haven't gotten everyone out. We still have hostages there now, probably 1,000 or so, by my estimate at least. So the Taliban were supposedly our friends. And when the bombing happened in the airport in Kabul, we were hearing that it might have been Al-Qaeda, it might have been ISIS, and that the Taliban were still our friends. We're giving them our inside information, lists of people who they should be clearing through, which some people call a kill list. So I was hoping that just to start things off, I'm wondering if perhaps you can break down for me and for our audience, what is the difference between the Taliban, I keep saying it like Joe Biden now, the Taliban, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda. And I know that there's a few ISIS. I'm not sure if you know the distinction between one ISIS and another. But, yeah, if you could just break down what they're, where they're similar, where they're different, what they're all, maybe how they evolved, and break that down for everyone so we can have a better understanding as to what these different groups are.
Okay. I'm going to start with apologies to you and your audience. I'm not going to directly answer this question yet. I want to give you a little piece of background. It is a philosophical background, but it's important. I also would like to indicate to you, before we go anywhere, when we invaded, which we did effectively, Afghanistan back in 2001, my immediate reaction was that if we examine the history of that area back to the time of Alexander the Great, all right, so we're talking now 2,300 years. During that time, no one has successfully controlled Afghanistan, no outsider.
Why is that?
I'm about to explain that. Okay. Very simply, the geography. They know, the people, the locals, they know every nook and crag in those mountains. They know every cave. They know every place. And they can pounce out on you, whether in the old days they were shooting arrows or dumping rocks on people, or whether now they pop out with their rifles. And in the 19th century, it was the British that got massacred with them when they came in there. And in 20th century, with the primitive rifles, far more primitive than what the British had. But they know the place. And so it's almost impossible to maintain control there without strong support of the locals. If you want to control Afghanistan, you have to have the local support. And that is something that you need to win by convincing the locals that they should support you. Now, the Taliban, many of them are the locals. So therefore, because they're the locals, they have local support. But they don't have universal support because the locals there are different locals in different parts of the country. And the locals themselves fight with each other and oppose each other. The Taliban, however, do something which is not very nice. And by the way, you know, with the Taliban as our friends, there's an expression in Jewish, such friends with such friends, what do you need enemies for? The bottom line is the Taliban are not nice guys. They have a very interesting form of Islam. It originally started, really, these ideas were circulating in the 19th century in a place called Deoband in India. That's where it came from. And it was peaceful. But they adopted a large, shall we say, militant attitude. And this militant attitude really can be placed upon 2 or 3 developments that have happened since 1950. To deal with this, and this...
So the Taliban were around in 1950? Because I always assumed that they were relatively new.
The Taliban were around during that, yes, but they weren't what they are.
Right.
They become what they are really because of what's going on in the period of the 1970s, 80s, really, and 90s. And let me first give this little piece of background, because this is a background not only to the Taliban, it's also a background to Al-Qaeda and to Daesh or ISIL or ISIS, whatever you want to call it. And if you want later, I can explain the difference. But the bottom line is, this goes back to someone, and I teach a course in terrorism. The first lesson I give on the modern period, I talk about this fellow. And he's a very interesting fellow. He's not a very loud fellow. He's not your typical terrorist that you would think is a terrorist. He was a scholar, and he was extremely bright. And his name was Sayyid or Hussein Sayyid Ibrahim al-Qutb, K-U-T-B. And it's interesting, you know, Arab names, and it's true, by the way, not only Arab names, it's true with names in many languages, including English to some extent. They have meanings in the language. Qutb means poles, like the North Pole and the South Pole, Qutb. And it's fascinating because he is very polarizing, this fellow, in his ideas. And I don't think that's why he's polarizing. His ideas are polarizing. This Qutb is an intellectual, and he's described by some as an author, educator, scholar of Islam, theorist, and revolutionary, as well as a poet and a leading member and founder in a certain, shall we say, intellectual sense, of the Ikhwan Muslimi, the Muslim Brotherhood, which by the way, is virulently anti-West and, of course, virulently anti-Israel. So two of my favorite people together. I saw this message, yes. Well, we could say that very easily. In any event, this Qutb comes to the United States. Now, when he came to the United States, I want to make this clear. The United States in 1950 is not the United States in 2020. In 1950, there's no gay marriage. In fact, it was, I believe, in around 56 that there was the first transsexual operation. George Jorgensen became Christine Jorgensen. It was written up in the New York Times extensively then. So
when was that?
His name was George Jorgensen, and he became Christine Jorgensen. And I remember, because I was a kid, and I remember seeing this man looks like a woman here with a long flowing blonde hair and whatever. And they did surgeries, and they supposedly was a woman, because really not a woman, because can't have babies the way women have babies. But that's another issue.
Right.
I don't want to get into that. At any event, the bottom line is that he didn't see that, but he saw women walking around with short skirts. He saw other things. He talks about 42nd Street. He saw 42nd. Again, 42nd Street then is not what it was later. But the bottom line is he was repelled by Western society. He comes back to Egypt, and he starts delving more into Islamic roots and writing about this. And initially, Nasser thought he was on his side. He even offered him a good position, but he refused it because he didn't want to work with the socialist Nasser, who had seized power in about 53 in Egypt. So now you have this man, and ultimately this man gets involved in a plot to assassinate Nasser, because Nasser is a socialist. He's not a real Muslim to him. Socialists are not full Muslims. And ultimately, he will be executed by Nasser. He was executed in 1966. That's when in August of 66, he was on trial. And if you look at him in the...
So I'm curious, when you said that socialism, you implied is an anathema to Islam. And I'm surprised by that. I've never heard that before, that there's any sort of conflict, but specifically between socialism and Islam. Because socialism, people tend to think of as an economic system rather than a religious system, or a competing religious system, so to speak, even though we've seen how socialism is perverted into being far more than just an economic system. It's more of a power system, and it's more of it's more of a way of enabling the elite people who are running a country to establish their tyranny. But as far as it being in any sort of way, shape, or form competing with Islam or against Islam, I'm wondering if you could break that down for me, because I'm really interested by that.
All right, it's a good question. First of all, there's two ways of looking at socialism. The socialism when I get into this, teaching this, the socialism with a small s and socialism with a large s. Socialism with a small s theoretically has many positive attributes. The idea of distribution of wealth so that people are happy, and also motivating some of the early socialists, such as Robert Owen and New Lanark, did all sorts of very interesting things which motivated workers to produce more. So this kind of a thing, socialism in this sense, was a positive system, or at least partial socialism. The negative thing...
Just to be clear, you're not promoting and advocating for socialism.
No, I was just about to say.
Okay.
You cut me off.
I know, but I can picture my chat just exploding with like.
No, ladies and gentlemen.
Joe's dad is a commie.
No. Let me finish. All right. Okay. Let me finish. It's very interesting. When I explain socialism, this is how I explain socialism. I say, okay, we have someone my age. Let's say I have 20 kids. All right. and I can't work that hard anymore because I'm no longer, young. Meanwhile, we have someone 20 years old, strong and agile, able to produce a great deal. So under socialism, 80% of what he produces comes to me, and I'm producing next to nothing. So it sounds very nice to the producer of next to nothing. But what's going to happen how long is that man going to continue to produce what he's producing? The man who's 20. That's the problem. The biggest problem with socialism as a system is that it inhibits motivation. And the greatest accomplishments of society have been made through motivation. But this is another topic. This is really not
okay. No, but I want to zero in on how it conflicts with Islam.
Okay. Now, Islam, it doesn't directly conflict with Islam, but socialism, as Nasser was practicing it, emphasizing the economic and emphasizing the growth of the economy of Egypt and the government control of that conflicted with the fundamentalist idea of Islam that everything comes from Allah, that the society should follow Sharia law and not the concepts of socialism. And Islamic law, Sharia law, is very, very different than socialism. In fact, if I start getting into that, some of the things we're going to see when we talk about Afghanistan, what Sharia law is, because that's what the Taliban want. And that's what, by the way, many people want in this country. Just be aware, there are many. I'm not saying all Muslims, God forbid. I would never say that. It would not be true. But there are some Muslims who look to the day when Sharia law will replace American law here. And they teach this to their little kiddies.
Can you give one or two examples where Sharia law would be overridden by socialism? Because I'm really curious about this. So I want to find where this clash is between them, so I can understand better. One of the reasons that, to me, this is like an important question is because we see so many leftists who are huge supporters of socialism and Islam. And I'm sure that none of them, not a single one of them, understands that there's a conflict there. And that's why I want to be more informed, so I can say, you're promoting two things that are anathema to each other.
Socialism.
So what's examples of Sharia law could you give that?
In Sharia law, a person has to follow certain kinds of behavior regarding how he relates to women, for example. And women are forbidden under strict Sharia law from doing certain things, which in an open socialist society, certainly they would do. If you examine, I'm saying this is not practiced all over, but if you examine, for example, Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia today now, by the way, they are abandoning some of these practices, which the ulama, which is the religious group, people like to call them the preachers, or the priests. They're not. There's no such thing as a priest in Islam. But anyway, the ulama have condemned some of this, the right-wing ulama, and these Taliban are enacting them. For example, I have it here, just a minute. I could read to you how the Taliban are treating women. And no socialist would approve of this kind of a thing. In terms of treating women, the restrictions they place on women, basically, I don't have the notes handy, but basically in simple terms, the women cannot go out unless they're fully veiled, and their veils are much bigger than the hijab. Their veils mean a slit from the eyes. Where I'm putting my hands here, that's it. The mouth, everything is covered. They look like walking tents, those ladies. I've seen pictures of them. That's what they look like. I mean, I'm not making this up.
No, I know you're not. I've seen pictures.
That's what they look like.
I keep going.
All right. Anyway, so women are only allowed to the only job that women can do where they interact outside, according to the strict Taliban rules, would be to take care of women, medical treatment for women, because no man can give treatment to a woman. Now, of course, this is going to cause a problem down the road, because if a man can't give treatment to a woman, how is a male going to teach a woman, unless you have women doctors in a women's university training women doctors, and how are they going to do that? But this is not the concern. The concern is extreme separation of sex. And we see this in other groups too, but not to this extent. Women's employment is very heavily restricted. And again, under Sharia law, and now it depends. Sharia law, see, this is one of the problems. Sharia law there's no such thing as one Sharia law. There are 4 different kinds of Sharia law, depending on which school of Islamic law one follows. I mean, I can give you the names, but I don't think the audience needs to hear this now. The bottom line is that they differ on things. Now, I'll give you one quick example. Wahhabi, it's Hanbali, which is a main line, but it's an extreme offshoot of this. In Sharia law, a man, according to the Quran, according to Islamic law generally, a man can divorce his wife. So how does he divorce his wife? He says, get out, and take your belongings with you. And she's divorced. Now, depending, though, on which school of law, he can't just do that. According to one school of law, he can say it now, then he has to wait a month or one cycle, lady cycle, and then he can say it again. And then after another cycle, he can say it again.
Chazaka.
Right. Right. It's like a chazaka, but the idea is he has to wait 2 months.
A chazaka is a principle in Jewish law where if something happens 3 times, then it's considered established. So that's why I was making that reference. I knew my father would understand, and probably almost none of you would understand. But
I shouldn't do that.
That's why I'm explaining it. But is in certain ways Sharia law based in any way, shape, or form on Jewish law? I mean, I know it's far more oppressive.
Oh boy, I don't want to start with this.
Okay.
I mean, look, yes, the answer is that look, we know that Muhammad. I mean, now a Muslim. I tell this to a Muslim, he's going to get very angry. He's going to get very upset. The Western historians of Islamic history will tell you that Muhammad. We know that Muhammad, before he had what he says are his revelations. All right, before he had his revelations, in quotes, that Muhammad visited with Jews and with Christians, and that he was very familiar with Judaism and Christianity as practiced in the Eastern Orthodox churches. And some of his statements that came from the angel Jibril, which is Gabriel or Gavriel in Hebrew. When this occurred, so he says that some of these things that came from are similar to, very similar to, I shouldn't say came from, just say similar to what we find in Judaism, and also, although it's different in Islam and Christianity as well. Though what I'm saying is, yes, there is a very clear link in this. And in fact, Muhammad called himself the Khatam Nabiyyin, the seal of the prophets. He's the final prophet. And Isa, which is Jesus, and also, of course, Musa, Moses, these are prophets. So the bottom line is, yes, there is a lot of that, and some of it is enacted into Sharia. But Sharia develops not only from what Muhammad said directly. There are so many things that were not covered directly in the Quran that developed during the 8th century, which is a century after the death of Muhammad. They developed the science of the study of what's called the hadith. Hadith comes from the Arabic word haddatha, which is to recount, R-E-C-O-U-N-T. And what they had, each of these hadith had 2 parts. They had a content part, and they had the chain, or isnad, the chain. On top of the hadith, it said, Muhammad says X, and on the bottom it said, so-and-so heard it from so-and-so, heard it from so-and-so, heard it from so-and-so, who heard it from Muhammad himself. Now, what occurred with that was, there was big discussions over this. There were big discussions over this. And many of the collectors of these hadith said, wait a minute, the chain is not so strong. there was a chain that shad, which is strong, and daif, which is weak. So you have a strong chain, and okay, so that means it's reliable. And if the chain is not so strong, like number 3 in the chain heard it from number 2, but number 3 was 2 years old when number 2 died, or number 2 was in what is today Iraq, and number 3 was in Africa. So, in other words, the bottom line is these collectors of hadith, they classified the hadith as being A or B or C. And then depending on who these collectors were, that's how the schools of Sharia developed. The different madhab, the schools of Islamic law, that's how they developed. All right, we're getting way off the topic.
Right, we are. Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. You know, I'm sort of skeptical. I'm sort of hesitant to cut you off because the biggest criticism I have when I have you on is that everyone's like, "Let your father talk. Let your father talk." I get that over and over again, and
I'm sorry.
And I'm like, okay, you're so. You have such a broad wealth of knowledge about these topics. I know. I feel as if sometimes I'll ask you a question and it'll just sort of spiral, and that's why it's not like I'm trying to ever, keep you in check. It's a matter I'm trying to just sort of reel you back in.
Okay. So anyway, so this Sayyid Qutb, so they follow. So his ideas, in a way, you can say he's the grandfather of the militant Islamic movement. He didn't.
Who is?
This Sayyid Qutb, the one I mentioned before,
okay.
This guy who was executed in 1966 by Nasser. Because his writings are picked up. They're picked up by Banna, the Hassan Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're picked up by a lot of other people like this. And they're picked up by Osama. And also the Taliban, they follow these ideas too. And the bottom line is, he was appalled by what he saw as the horrible morality.
No, don't worry about it. You keep going, Dad. You keep going.
All right, okay.
I'll tell you if you need to.
What?
I'll tell you if. But this is what I'm saying. Like this, I'm getting over here. Let the wise Jews speak, and free greater law. Like, I just get this a lot. I get this a lot whenever you come on. Everyone thinks I'm just cutting you off, and I'm not trying.
No, he's not. He's not. No, God.
Okay, I'm sorry. So please,
because he's supposed to be respectful to me, and he's respectful to his father. He has to have respect, and therefore, if he were to cut me off, he wouldn't have respect. So he's not cutting me off. You have to understand that. Okay. All right. Anyway, the bottom line is that so these ideas they come around and they led to all sorts of things. Now, here, let me just. I'm going to give you now something on women with these fellows. That was massacres. Here we are. All right. Okay. Now, this is a quote. Brutal repression of women was widespread under the Taliban. This is before now, obviously, when they were in charge, until we threw them out. All right. And faced significant international condemnation. Abuses were myriad and violently enforced by religious police. For example, Taliban issued edicts forbidding women from being educated, forcing girls to leave schools and colleges. Women leaving their houses were required to be accompanied by a male relative, which, by the way, for a while was true in Saudi Arabia also, and were obliged to wear the burqa, which we described. All right, I won't read that part. Okay. Those accused of disobeying this were publicly beaten. In one instance, a young woman named Sohla was charged with adultery after walking with a man who was not a relative. She was publicly flogged in Qazi Stadium, receiving 100 lashes. I'll tell you, by the way, in Saudi Arabia, if a person's accused of adultery, often they would execute the two of them. Female employment was restricted to the medical sector, which I mentioned before, where male and personnel were prohibited from treating women and girls. This extensive ban on employment of women further resulted in a widespread closure of primary schools, as almost all teachers prior to the Taliban's rise to power had been women. Thus further restricting access to education, not only to girls, but also to boys.
So this was when, Daddy? This was
before 2001 when we knocked them out.
And who was running? That was the Taliban running it then?
The Taliban was running Afghanistan at that point. Now, I will tell you, by the way, it's a very interesting thing.
There was a question here that someone threw out, which is why do people not write hadith down? Was it the pre-literacy?
No, there was some literacy, definitely. Here's the point. Now, again, a good Muslim would not be would not be happy the way I'm going to explain this. This is a Western scholar's perspective. That the hadith become necessary because Muhammad, as the seal of the prophets, the final prophet, is the great legislator. Now, but things come up that have to be dealt with. And how do you deal with those things? So they said, Muhammad said this or he said that, but it wasn't in the Quran. In fact, going back, again, this is way beyond what we're supposed to talk about. The Quran, when Muhammad dies, he dies in 632. There were 10 men whom he promised paradise to. Those 10 men supposedly had memorized his, what the Muslims will say, revelations, his revelations. Now, these men are warriors, and they begin to die, both of natural causes or of wounds in battle. Now, as they die, there becomes a real, shall we say, concern that everything's going to be forgotten. In 644, there is a caliph who accedes to power. His name is Uthman, and there's fascinating stories about him. That really is off the topic. But Uthman, one of the things that he does that gets him into trouble, believe it or not, a lot of trouble. In fact, he ultimately will be murdered. One of the things that gets him into this problem is he decides that the Quran means recitation. Now you have a Hebrew word to call out. All right, qara'a in Arabic means to call out. They also say it means to read, because when you read out loud. In fact, in the Muslim world, until recently, most people were illiterate. And if you had a literate person, he would take, not in the cities, but out in the countryside, a literate person would take the newspaper, he would sit on the corner and he would read the newspaper and people would gather around to find out what's going on. That's what they did. I heard this in the context of Turkey and other places also. In any event, what happened was that these recitations of Muhammad, the Quran, now they created a board. It's interesting, by the way, the word for board, like in Hebrew, va'ad, there's a board of examiners. It's also the same word as the police, P-O-L-I-C. Short means police. And in fact, it's cute. In Israel, they have on the police cars, they have that word written in Arabic letters on the police cars in Israel because they also speak Arabic, the police there. In any event, so they made this board, and the board now has to decide. Let's say Ibrahim comes up and he says, okay, I heard from Muhammad this. So now the board has to decide, do we put it in the Quran or not? And a lot of stuff wasn't put in. And guess how Ibrahim feels if his stuff isn't put in? He's not a happy camper. And in fact, there's such dispute over this that some of the people whose ideas for the Quran were refused ultimately will be involved with the group that will murder this Caliph Uthman in 656 when he's murdered.
So the Quran, just so I know that I'm understanding you correctly, the Quran was basically crafting that was approved by a board that had been put together for the purposes of figuring out what Muhammad teachings would be transmitted for future generations.
Right, and there are several versions of the Quran. So, for example, when I went to Egypt in 1975, I checked what am I allowed to bring into Egypt, and it said you're only allowed to, I believe, if I remember, it may be wrong on this, but they're only allowed to bring in a Maliki Quran. One of the schools of Islamic law is the Maliki school. The school which the Taliban follow is the Hanbali school, and there are differences between them in terms of Sharia law. Like I mentioned, this I don't know for certain if this applies here, but I mentioned the difference in divorcing, for example. There can be different, all sorts of differences in many things like that.
Is there one version that's more aggressive than another? is the one that's particularly aggressive.
The Maliki is very strict. It's more strict than normally than the Hanafi. And there's another one, the Hanbali, which is quite strict also. That's very strict.
My question about being aggressive was perhaps a little bit too generic. There are two ways that I can see a religion being aggressive. One is, being more oppressive to people who violate it. Another could be aggressive with respect to infidels, that we're going to be that much more engaging to try and force people to follow Sharia law, and the threat of sword, rather than trying to convert people by softer measures.
Islam. All right. Now,
so my question is: are there distinctions like between, Quran A versus Quran B? That we see that this one is more in either way. Is like softer
Best
than the other.
answer I can give you, and I have not read through the Qurans and the different ones and compared them, so I can't speak definitively, is that there are certain schools that are more, shall we say, are stricter in treating non-Muslims than others. I'd also tell you that there are many periods in Jewish history, for example, and also it's true of Christians, when certain groups of Muslims come to power, and when they come into power, those things get bad for Jews and also for Christians, because depending on who's in power.
So Crusader Saracen is asking, how is Samuel HaNagid recorded regarding in modern Judaism?
Okay, my answer to that would be that he was considered quite a very important figure. He actually is unique in many ways because he actually commanded a Muslim army, which maybe you're familiar with. I don't know that you asked this question. But again, the position of the Jews was tenuous. After he died, his son Yusuf took over, and there was a riot, and he was murdered later, several years later. So that again, these kind of things come up. By the way, I am inviting all of you, if you want to make these super chats and you want to ask me anything about this area. I don't promise that I'm able to answer it. I could answer this, but I'd be happy to take any and all questions on this if you make super chats out of them. I'm happy to do that. If we can, parenthetically toss in stuff if you're interested in that. In any event, so the Taliban have been very violent. They understand violence, and I know that Good Logic mentioned something which I had discussed with him, not on the air, about the Russians who were kidnapped and the response of the Russian government, and of course that's why no Russians are kidnapped anymore. Because I'm not going to repeat that again. If he wants, he can repeat it again. But the bottom line is, I said to him, this is why the Russians aren't kidnapped. And then he looked it up and he got all the details, which I didn't remember all of them, but we found all the details quickly. And the bottom line of that is, these guys understand violence. They are one of the biggest problem that we have as Americans working in the Judeo-Christian tradition is dealing with people who are not working in that tradition. You can't assume that the mindset of these people is the same as ours. I also would toss out that unless someone has studied Arabic, or in the case of the Taliban, Pashto and Dari, which by the way I don't know at all, you can't really get inside these guys because people think differently. I'm going to tell you a funny story. Has nothing to do with this, but it makes the point very dramatically. First time I was in Paris was in 1990. Just my first wife, may she rest in peace, and I came to Paris. And of course, we eat only kosher food. So where do you find out where the food is? You go into the rabbinical organization of Paris. So we go in there. I meet a rabbi from Morocco. And the rabbi and I start talking in Hebrew for about 20 minutes. And then I said to him, okay, good. Tell me where the restaurants are, but you're going to be naming French street names. And then I switched into French. And I said, tell me in French all these names. So after a minute, he says, do I know where the Faubourg de Montmartre is? So I look at him and I said, I have no idea, but I didn't say I have no idea. There's an idiom in English. The idiom in English, which because this is the way Englishmen think, the idiom in English is, it's Greek to me. Most of you have heard this. But in French, they know Greek. So what did they say in French? It's Hebrew to me. So here, after I've been speaking Hebrew to him for 20 minutes, I turn to him, so how am I going to express this? So I go, well, as you would say in French, it's Hebrew to me. That's how I put it to him. And then starts to laugh. And in any event, then he explained to me, I'll draw you mind. But again, now, what is the Hebrew idiom for it's Greek to me? It's Chinese to me. Again, if you know the language, then you get the feel. And there's thousands of idioms like this. And that's why, for example, if you want to get a doctorate in Chinese history from Columbia University, they make you live for a couple of years in China.
So we have a question here, for another one from Crusader Saracen, saying, how did the Spanish succeed in expelling Islam in the Reconquista, where the Romans failed in Syria, Egypt, which were Christian for centuries?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I really haven't thought about this. I like the question. Okay. I really do. All right. I like the question because it's a good question. Okay.
Well, someone named Crusader Saracen probably can ask you a lot of great questions. So.
All right. Okay. I haven't listened. I mean, this is my interest. What he's interested in. We're interested in the same thing. All right.
We're gonna try and keep it like under 3 minutes. Okay.
Just a minute. Okay. The dynamics in Spain are very different than the dynamics in the Middle East. Okay. In Spain, you always had a Christian presence in northern Spain. And they were pushing down the Christians, and there was warfare, and the Muslims get split and they fight among themselves. It's known as the period of the typhus.
Keep going, Dad. Keep going. Yeah.
Okay. Which means the small kingdoms. And they were knocking each other off, and they were weakening each other. Then there were Berber invasions, the invasion of the Murahidun, which is the Murabids in Spanish. They came in, and then the Almohads Muwahid, that's another group that's 80, 90 years later. They come in, and this turns the whole area inside out and weakens it while the Christians are pushing steadily forward. And after 1265, the whole northern part of the peninsula is under Christian control, and Granada is just sort of holding out there. While in the Middle East, it's very different. In the Middle East, you'll have, first of all, a big split between the Byzantine government, which is called themselves the Eastern Roman Empire, and the people, indigenous Christians in the Middle East. Indigenous Christians in the Middle East, many of them were Monophysite, which means that they believed that Jay who walked the earth actually was God himself. They denied the Trinity. And during the 6th century, Justinian's armies pushed through the area, put bellies to the stomachs of these guys, and said, say, I believe in two natures, meaning a part of the Trinity, and they didn't, because they thought they'll go to hell if they deny the idea that there's only one nature and God himself was physically walking the earth. They put swords to the bellies, and these guys were killed. And these guys, a lot of them were killed. By the way, the Monophysite Christians still exist in Armenia and still exist in Egypt today. In any event, so what occurred was these guys held on, and then in come the Muslims. Now, a lot of people converted to Islam. Many Jews, there were a lot of Jews there who converted to Islam. And you know how they converted? They converted because the Muslims put economic pressure on them, but didn't put the sword to their belly. The Muslims basically, after the initial conquest, these people had to pay money in order to stay Christian, or they're different, but Jews too. And the bottom line was that as these taxes were heavy, and little by little, people said, oh, well, if we convert to Islam, we don't have to pay the tax. Ultimately, they had to switch it because their tax base eroded. There's a very good book on this, the poll tax, Bennett, the poll tax in early Islam. It's about 60 years old, but it's an excellent book. He analyzes this whole thing. It's a very good thing to read. I have it, I think, in my basement. If it wasn't destroyed in the flood, I have to go through all those. I had a big flood 3 weeks ago.
I have to take a shot. I have another question from you from Crusader Sarasan here. And I'm going to take a shot. And after you answer this question, I do want to start getting into the differences between the Taliban, Al Qaeda, and ISIS.
Okay, I see the question.
So this is the question. Crusader's asking, I've heard that the Ottoman Emperor saved over 100,000 Jews who were expelled from Spain, but never understood why. So,
okay, Crusader Saracen. Let me tell you first of all, he's the Sultan, not the Emperor. But anyway, now the Sultan, what you're talking about, primarily the Sultan Suleiman, but to some extent his father, who was Salim the Grim, Salim Chavez, Salim the Grim. Why? It's very simple. They had, these fellas, the Ottomans, welcomed non-Muslims because they knew that they helped the economy, they knew they helped build the empire, and the Jews were welcome. In fact, there's a beautiful case study, as a book by Cecil Roth on Dona Gracia Mendes, who was a Portuguese woman who inherited her husband's spice empire. And this woman, this woman, oh, come on. No, he's much better than I am. Come on. I don't know one half the piece of law that he knows, guys. All right. And anyway, Dona Gracia Mendes, this lady they call her the Murano Queen. She fled from Portugal and she went to Holland. And then, but at this period, Holland was still under the control of the Spanish. This is before Holland is independent. And the Spanish, of course, they're running the Inquisition. Finally, she ends up in Venice, and Suleiman threatens the Venetians, and the Venetians have big trading interests in his empire, and they let her go. And she comes in, and he brings her to the court, and he says, they're so stupid to throw her out. This woman is good, brings money and everything good. The Christians are such idiots. And that sums up the attitude very nicely as an answer to your question. There's much more than that, obviously, but that's a quick shot of an answer to your question.
Someone's saying that I read that wrong. I just want to, I don't see what I read wrong there, but okay. So another follow-up question. This is from Eldon Banneling. He's saying, hey, Dr. Nierman, when you're ready to reclaim all of Israel back from the snack bars, let me know. I'll be there in a jiffy. I got you back. I got your back. So I don't know what the snack bars mean.
Thank you. I'm not sure what you mean, but I thank you. Yeah. And I thank you for being so generous to my son. That I thank you for. Yes.
As do I. So I do want to get your take on Taliban, ISIS, Al Qaeda. Okay. What is the difference?
Oh, what's the difference? All right.
Do they hate each other the way that we're led to believe?
Yes and no. The answer is yes and no. All right. Okay.
Okay. So what's the story there?
I mean, this stuff is not. You can't draw straight lines. It's stuff.
Right. And then I'm going to ask you about how the Afghan army plays into that, because I imagine, we were led to believe the Afghan army is 300,000 strong, that they're going to hold off the Taliban, and they're backed up by our military, so they're definitely going to hold off and I picture that when the Taliban rolled in, a lot of them just sort of changed jerseys and were like, yeah, we're Taliban now.
That's right. Yes.
So
you know why they changed jerseys? Because they didn't change jerseys. They'd be wearing dirt jerseys.
Meaning they were always Taliban.
What?
You're saying they were always Taliban?
No, they'd be killed.
Oh.
We're afraid of the Taliban.
Oh, okay.
And the fact that the Americans... Oops, 1 second here. Just a minute. 1 second. Diane, I need a towel. I spilled the water. I'm pouring water for a drink on the table here. Diane?
Apparently, snack bar is a... Crusaders saying snack bar is a pejorative upon an Allahu Akbar.
Well, I didn't know that. I've never
heard that. I never heard that either. Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's not nice. All right. I mean, it depends how you're using that. Just a second.
Bum.
All right. Just make sure they're on the table.
Many of you may not realize this, but my dad is actually right now next door to me in my sister's house. My sister lives next door to me. So he's staying by my sister's house, which is why he's got a different background than his normal thing is. And apparently they got a little bit of a spill going on over there.
We spilled the water on a very nice table. It's got to be dried up before.
Right. Because otherwise my sister would probably be freaking out. She doesn't.
My daughter would not be a happy camper.
My sister.
I prefer she not know this happened. Yes.
Yeah. Not everyone. Shh. Don't tell Yafa the hammer. So
anyway, so where were we?
We were talking about. So you were explaining how the Afghan army basically were under threat of death. Basically, men have switched over.
The point to all of this is, this is a very. I believe this was a terrible mistake, in the way he did this, and I'll tell you why. I'm not only about Afghanistan. So Afghanistan was a bad mistake because the Bahram Air Base there gave us capabilities on Iran, Russia, and China, even more importantly. Just the knowledge that we could do something to some extent can inhibit them. I'm concerned that Taiwan they may try to take Taiwan, because one of the things that the good Lawgic's mama always told me, and she spent her life studying China. She had learned Chinese. One of the things that she always told me is there's one thing about which the Chinese agree, whether they be the communists or the Chinese on Taiwan, and that is that Taiwan is part of China. So it's a long time, but that doesn't mean that the communists don't want Taiwan, and that would be very, very bad if they take Taiwan. It puts them in a very strong position, which is not good in terms of the whole Far Eastern arena there. And I am concerned about this. The same way I'm concerned that the image that we're projecting around the world is effect. And that emboldens all of the bad actors and potential people.
What was the word you used?
What?
The image were effect?
Yeah, it means weak. E-F-F-E-T-E. I believe it means weak.
I thought it was pronounced effete.
Maybe it's pronounced effete. I don't know.
I was wondering.
I think it's effect, but I'm not sure.
And now I'm very curious.
So look it up. All right, maybe they're both.
If I ever catch you, I'm mispronouncing it. Or that's a big day. It's a big day for me.
You listen.
Oh, you're right. You were right. It's a fet.
I was going to say, it's very funny because these people that were murdered, the Christians that believe, as I said, that he walked the earth was God alone, they're called monophysites, Monophysites. And when I was in graduate school, actually I was a senior in college, I'd never heard such a word. So I come in and I had this wonderful professor, may he rest in peace, Marshall Whitehead Baldwin, was a wonderful, wonderful man. And he made it possible for me to take courses that were on the Sabbath without ever going. Gave me assignments and stuff so that I could fulfill requirements. He was a very sweet and good man and helped me with my doctorate. He was one of my mentors for my doctorate. And I still remember this conversation. I walk in and I'm talking about these guys. I'm asking him a question about these fellows that I just mentioned to you. And I go, the monophysites. So Professor Baldwin looks at me, goes, Harris, my first English, goes, Harris, the who? So I go, the monophysites. I go, seriously, Professor Baldwin. And I said, you must. So he looks at me and he starts to laugh. And he goes, you mean the monophysites, like that? So that's how he put it. He didn't make it that I was stupid or anything else. So he taught me a lot of things. He taught me to, as a teacher, never to make a student feel funny. Right. And he taught to be gentle.
How old were you when that happened?
Correct. I was 19, 20, 19.
We have more questions here. Crusader Saracens asking, what caused the wide shift from caliphates to more secular governments throughout the Middle East? Will large-scale caliphates like the Fatimids ever reoccur?
Oh, this man is opening on a whole interesting thing. First of all,
he's Crusader is determined to sidetrack us from ever answering the first question I opened.
All right, okay. Anyway, all right. Let me.
Before you answer that, on the follow-up on the snack bars, Elton Bannerling says you have to use snack bars because YouTube mostly does not allow Israel and that religious group's name to be mentioned in the same sentence. So that's why he had to use snack bar instead of the whole Allah thing. So that was why he was saying he was saying I'm not being derisive. I'm trying to get around the YouTube algorithm. So the question again from Crusader is, what caused the wide shift from caliphates to more secular governments throughout the Middle East? Will large-scale caliphates like the Fatimids ever reoccur. I also want, on that same thought, on that same question, I will tell you, one of the smartest people I know, and not really well educated, but self-taught, self-educated, and brilliant men that I know, he has a theory that when it comes to dangerous Middle East leaders, he said, you want to know the difference between a dangerous Middle East leader and one who's genuinely threatening and one who's just saber-rattling in order to appease his followers but will never do anything? The difference is if they wear a tie. Any Muslim who wears a tie has too much interest in his self-indulgence and in his own fatness, and he's too westernized to really believe that I'm going to push the button and blow up my own country in order to promote Islam. He's not to him Islam. He'll say Islam first because he needs to basically get support from his followers, but he doesn't really believe it and feel it in his heart. The only ones we need to be afraid of are the ones who will never ever put on a tie. So even if they put
the
on
mullahs in Iran.
Yeah, he goes, those are the ones you really have to be afraid of. The ones who put on a tie.
I'm very much afraid of them.
The ones who put on. So I will ask you this: do you agree with him that any Muslim who puts on a tie is someone we never have to worry about genuinely being?
I can't say any Muslim.
Do you think that is a general rule that's a
as
fair?
a general rule, I would think this. Yeah, to some extent, yes. To some extent.
Okay.
Certainly
Now,
proclivity. Now coming
with
back
that,
to this question.
we'll come back to this question.
All right, now
the shift from caliphates to more secular governments.
All right, let's step back and answer the last part. First of all, who were the Fatimids? There were two main caliphates. The two major caliphates, although the Ottomans claimed to be caliphs too for a while, but the ones that are considered caliphates was the Umayyad Caliphate or Umayyad Caliphate in English, and that's from 660 until 750, when it's overthrown by Abdul Abbas, who creates the Abbasid Caliphate, which exists in name, but they were puppets after the middle of the 10th century up until 1258. Those are Sunni caliphates, meaning Orthodox Muslim caliphates. I don't have time to get into this now. I did explain this at a prior session on this program. Now, the Fatimid dynasty is a Shia dynasty. That's, in other words, they're Shiites. They seize power in Cairo in 969, and they are overthrown by Salahuddin, or Saladin in English, in 1171, when the last Caliph Al-Adid is forced into retirement, and they change the address in the Friday pair from his name to the name of the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. Now, will there be a caliphate again? Well, that is the goal, or what is the goal of ISIS. They would love to have that. And al-Baghdadi and his gang, that is the goal of Al-Qaeda, excuse me. And the ISIS or Daesh, they claim to be reestablishing such a caliphate. And will it really happen? Again, the Talmud says that after a certain point in time, which is long ago, that prophecy was given to fools and little kids. I no longer can claim to be a little kid, and I don't like to think of myself as a fool. So therefore, I hate to make prophecies. I would say that I doubt that it's really going to be too successful, such a caliphate, under the normative situations that exist in the world at this time, for the simple reason that most of the Muslims don't want a caliph, because that means they would have to subordinate their authority to such a person, and I don't think they want to do that.
Okay. So Ben Graziano says, I'd like to recommend the old history sci-fi series Ring of Fire. First book is 1631. The Abarbanel family and Spinoza are central characters. Great reads. So
okay, thank you. All right.
And Crusader has another question here. People have told me that the pullout from Afghanistan was a complete success. Thank you, Joe Biden, to my face. Can you believe the chutzpah? I can't believe the chutzpah of that. But yeah, if you want to comment.
Listen, what I've seen, people, look, there are none so blind as those who will not see. A complete success. What's a complete success? I mean, how do you define a success? The fact that you have roughly maybe 1,000, certainly many hostages there.
Yeah.
And they go and do, I mean, what's a success?
And dead, and all the dead,
and the dead, and the mistakes, and And the equipment,
$85 billion. $85 billion in military.
we didn't blow up the equipment. What kind? I mean, maybe someone's on the payroll there. I don't know. It makes no sense. That makes absolutely no sense.
Do you think
we didn't destroy the equipment?
Do you think we need to worry that equipment will be used for anything other than for them to expand their borders beyond Afghanistan?
Well, I don't.
Based on what you know of the Taliban,
it's not likely they'll be successful. Although Pakistan and they are in cahoots. You know, when we attacked there, the leaders and most of them that got away with ISI. That's the Pakistani intelligence. They helped them to get away. So now, why?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Some claim they were afraid of them. Some claim that's because they were afraid of them. All right.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's
genocide.
I apologize to Yethna that I saw this and then you were in the middle of talking when this came in. So there's a question: is there a genocide in Yemen? Why is MSM silent?
That's very possible. It's possible. I'm not that familiar with what's going on there, and the news out of there is very, very weak. So I'm really not sure, but it's certainly a possibility.
Who's being killed? Who's being killed there?
This is not. There are large numbers of people being killed there. There are some Christians there, and any Christians are in great danger there. And even the Shiites and the Sunnites, they fight there. And I really don't know too much about this, but I would tell you that what we would call ethnic cleansing and this kind of mass murder of groups is not that unknown in that area. It's not that unknown in that area. It happened. The Shiites came in in the Iraqi war. There was killing there of the Sunnites when the Shiites came in, and vice versa, the other side. One of the reasons, I think I mentioned this also before, but one of the reasons that Bashar al-Assad, I love his names. I mentioned these names have meanings. All right. Hafiz al-Assad, that's his tati, his father. Hafiz al-Assad means keeper of the lion, Lion, a lion. All right. Bashar al-Assad means good news of the lion. I guess when the boy was born, they were very happy that he was born. The Assad family belongs to a sect called the Alawi sect, which is a subsect of Islam, which is not popular with anyone. And when he got power, Hafiz, he brought in his family. You know, that's what they do. That's how it is over there. So now, when he got older, his son was a dentist working in London or in England somewhere. And he called him up and he said, listen, you got to come here and take over because when I die, our family's going to, and all our friends are going to get killed if you're not in charge. And that's why he murders people right and left, because he wants to keep power. He could easily leave, go to Switzerland. He's got billions of dollars, I'm sure, stored up there. But he's not going to go because he has to protect the gang, the whole hometown, because he knows what will happen if the others really gain power in Syria.
Okay, so
all right, whatever.
Coming back to our first question here.
Yes. What time is it now? It's after 11.
We're an hour in, and the first question I asked you in the first 3 minutes of the show was, what is the difference between the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS?
All right, well, Al-Qaeda basically is a terrorist organization that and they have branches all over. If you look, you can look online, you will see they have branches everywhere from Africa to Europe to North America to the Far East, the Philippines. And they want general disruption. Their plan, as articulated around 15, was that, not 15, I'm sorry, much earlier, around 08, was that by 2020, there's going to be general insurrection, economic collapse of the West, and ultimately the corrupt, evil, satanic governments will fall apart, and then Islam will take over and Sharia law will prevail.
That's Al-Qaeda.
That's Al-Qaeda. Okay.
So Al-Qaeda, basically, the goal there is to cause enough turmoil that we're going to have disruptions throughout the world, and Sharia law will dominate the entire world.
Correct.
Okay, fine.
That's one. Next. All right. ISIS. ISIS wanted, and thank God they've been pretty much obliterated, although there's still enough of them to resurrect. ISIS really wanted to create a caliphate. They put out their own magazine. Al-Qaeda did too, but they had much more. They were more interested in conquering territory, in taking over that territory. And as militant Muslims, what they did in that territory was anyone whom they didn't feel was a proper Muslim could be put to the sword. Anyone who was their enemy could be put to the sword. And they classify as anyone who writes against them, who reports against them. Obviously, if you don't support, you're either for us or you're the enemy. And anyone who's the enemy is open game, so to speak.
So, all the beheadings. When Obama was in power, I remember we saw all those beheadings of journalists and stuff like that.
Right.
That was under ISIS, because they were very strong armed militant Muslims.
Right.
How do they differ from the Taliban?
Well, let me tell you something very interesting.
Go on.
One of the resistance groups in Syria is an Islamic resistance group, but very anti-Islamic State or Daesh, anti-Daesh, ISIS. What did they? There was a clip today. I saw the clip actually over here. I saw it this evening. I happened to see the clip. It's a very interesting clip that they put out. The resistance group. It's a resistance also to the Islamic State. The Islamic State, if you remember, in their clips, what did they do? They dressed prisoners in like orange garb, and then they came with black hoods. They came, and they showed, and in some cases, I'm sure these kids have been ruined for life if they're still alive. They cut off the whatchamacallit, the heads of the people, because it says in the Quran that if you have a kufr, the unbelievers, you're going to rub a knife across the neck. So that's how they beheaded them, doing that. And they had 8-year-old kids, 7-year-old kids cutting off the heads of adults. And they showed this. And this motivated people to join them. One of the big things of both these groups, all these, not the Taliban, by the way, but these other groups, these other two, is motivation, propaganda to get people through the internet from all over the world to join them. There was a clip today showing the resistance people who are against ISIS. These people marched out, about 9 or 10 members of ISIS who had been captured. And the ISIS were dressed in black for ISIS. And these other guys were marching behind them. The ISIS guys were chained up. And the guys marching behind them were wearing orange outfits like the ones who had been executed or sentenced to be executed. And these other guys, they had the ISIS guys kneel. They pulled the black hoods off their heads and they showed them beheading them.
What? Who was beheading ISIS?
It's called the Islamic Resistance Group. It is one of about 5 different groups in fighting for control of Syria. Fighting, I don't know exactly. They might be Shiite, although I'm not sure about that. It would make very good sense if they're Shiite. Certainly, they may be funded by the Iran, because Iran it wants to have a lot of tumult there. Although Iran has generally been supporting Assad, so I don't know really. I'm not sure who they are.
So ISIS is very much about expansion of territory and strong arming.
Right. Now the Taliban,
as opposed to Al-Qaeda, which is more about toppling through more underhanded means and
terrorism, through terroristic means. Right. Finally, now the Taliban are interested in, at least now, so far, in controlling Afghanistan. Most of them come from that area, and they want to purify Afghanistan by making it a pure Islamic state with Sharia law. But the version of Sharia law that they practice is a very militant version of Sharia law, as opposed to a more moderate version of Sharia law. If that answers the question.
Okay. I think it does. So you're basically saying the Taliban compared to the others are less aggressive, but you're still saying that they're very quick. They'll still be very quick to be. They'll be very quick to be hard on their own people as far as making sure that they're keeping Sharia law.
Oh yeah, and anybody, for example, you have Sikhs and Hindus, some of them living in Afghanistan. These are being persecuted by these guys. Many of them are tried to get out because their lives, the same way Christians' lives are at serious risk. They're killing Christians. They're checking their phones. If they find signs on the phone that they're Christians, they're executing them. There was a fellow who came in there a few months ago and got the single last Jew out of Afghanistan. And there used to be a Jewish community in Afghanistan.
Well, that was the question I was about. That's the question I was about to ask you. Is that like I always hear these people talk about how Jews always lived in like these Arab countries, all the time, and Christians were able to live there. So, and maybe this ties in with the last question Crusader asked. Where he's saying Saladin had a reputation as a merciful and honorable man who treated prisoners well. How do we go from that to ISIS? So I think I'm sort of asking the same question. Why is it that historically there was this, the Muslim world as a general rule had a worldwide perception of not looking to kill anyone who isn't Muslim, as opposed to that feeling going on today? Has there been a shift in that, where they're more intolerant of infidels over the last several decades, or not?
Let's step back.
Okay.
Different times, yes. Different times, not. For example, the Fatimid dynasty, whom this gentleman mentioned before. This dynasty, because they were Shiite and they were a minority even in Egypt, which is basically Maliki Muslim. These guys were very good to Jews and Christians, the Fatimids.
Which ones were these? The Fatimids?
That's the dynasty he mentioned. The one.
And when and where were they?
They're in Egypt from 969 until 1171. Now, we even have documentation from the Geniza, the Kara Geniza, showing that they participated in with Simchas Torah. They came and sort of helped out the Jews with their ceremonies.
Simchas Torah is a very poorly known Jewish holiday. Poorly known meaning unless you're a religious Jew, you don't know what Simchas Torah is. It actually comes up next week on our calendar, and it's celebrating our completion of going through the year and reading through the Torah portion by portion, and we complete the Torah. So, and that comes out next week. So my father's saying that during that reign of the Fatimids, so they actually would even celebrate Simchat Torah, which is no relation to Islam at all. Simchat Torah.
But no, basically they're extremely tolerant. Saladin overthrows them. Things get worse for the Jews, but they're not bad. They're not. It's not rah-rah. It's not as good. Saladin generally does have, especially in Western literature, because of Sir Walter Scott's The Talisman, has a very nice reputation. There is an example where he was very brutal, but he had good reason, because these people were brutal. The Templars and Hospitallers, after the Battle of Hattin in 1187, he executed them, and some of them personally. But generally, he was very good, and he generally did utilize Jews. In fact, he put Jews, when he felt that the Christians were going to attack Jerusalem in the Third Crusade, he actually put Jewish officers on the walls. There's an article in Sion magazine by Joshua Prower on this, about 60, 70 years ago it was published. Very nice article, but it's only available in Hebrew, so I'm sorry. Anyway, the bottom line is, though, that, again, during certain periods, things are worse. In Spain, for example, I mentioned when the Almohads come in, the Almohads in Spanish, when they come in, it's lousy. It's only a short time, but it's lousy. There are periods during the Ottoman Empire, even when things are not so hot for the Jews or the Christians. It depends. For example, the Ottomans massacred the Armenians during World War I. In fact, Hitler, when he announced to some of his people that he wants to murder the Jews, he looked around the room, and this is what he said: "Wer rettet die Armenien jetzt? Who remembers the Armenians now?" That's what he said. He really said, because, who can? But you mentioned Turks to Armenians, boy, and it was funny. Today I met a gentleman was shopping around for a car, and I walked in and I said to him, "Oh, you're Armenian like this." And I thought to myself, yeah, if I would mention the Turks to him, he would be very unhappy. because the Armenians don't like the Turks, because the Turks did that. They killed 1.2 million Armenians at least. They killed, and that as a big percentage of Armenians that probably than Hitler killed of Jews as a percentage of total numbers.
Wow.
So yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I have a bunch of questions here. Yethnis asking, any danger of your dad being canceled from his job for answering spicy questions?
I doubt it. From Turo, I doubt it.
What do you all think of Jihad Watch reporting and explanations?
I don't know what that is exactly.
I don't either. I'm not sure what that is.
I'm sorry, I don't know what it is.
Cat Trout says, I can see the respect you have for each other. When is Dad getting his own channel? I'm too old to go back to school. I would listen to The Good Doctor every day. There you go.
Thank you so much. Frankly, I enjoy doing this, but not every night. I'm working. I teach in Turo a great deal, and that's whatever. And I also do other things. I train rabbis too, so I'm busy. Anyway, what's this?
Crusader asks, if not too long, can you please recite On the Haras Bavel in Hebrew? He always wanted to hear it.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
All right, it's the beginning, and that's the whole thing. All right, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway.
I mentioned to them that On the Haras Bavel is the. Someone mentioned it once, and I said that's the first. That's the paragraph which we use in preceding grace.
Only on days.
Only on sad days.
On sad days. That's because it's describing the exile.
Yeah. Matthew Harder says, good logic. What are you and your father's thoughts on Mormons believing ancient Jews sailed to America and became the Indians? I've never heard that before.
Never heard it really. I may have heard it, but I forgot it.
It makes very little sense to me.
Not very likely.
It seems very, very unrealistic.
The argument would be that it was the 10 lost tribes that they became Indians. The 10 lost tribes became Indians, but there's no evidence that I've seen to support that. I mean,
it seems very unlikely that they would have engaged the polytheism the way that the Indians did. I mean, Indians are wholeheartedly into polytheistic beliefs
and human sacrifice, which is anathema to us.
Oh, and speaking of which, Danielle also mentioned something. She didn't have a super chat, but I thought it was an interesting thing because you had mentioned the last Jew left in Afghanistan, and she mentioned that the last Jew in Afghanistan refused to leave for so long because he didn't want to sign a religious divorce for his wife in Israel. So he literally picked the Taliban over giving a get.
You know, that's a very interesting thing. You say it, and I think I saw it, but had forgotten it completely, and it may be right. I believe I may have seen that. Yeah, there was a whole crazy reason why he didn't leave. Yes, I think so. What? Yeah. My wife is sitting here, and she said she heard it too. So
he was trying to avoid having to give a divorce.
Camera on the other side, and she said she heard it too. That makes sense. I mean, that's a whole other issue. The question of Jewish divorce. That's an interesting topic. We can get into it some other time, maybe.
Yeah, so I was actually thinking about going back to a couple of questions that topics that you said you didn't want to like get into the whole thing about. So let's talk about the exit from Afghanistan and what you think would have been the best thing that we should have done with respect to Afghanistan. Like what if you had your druthers? And before we get into this, Crusaders, I got one more question here, which says, I remember reading about a Jewish community that exists in Iran. How is that a thing? Is that really true? I don't even know there's still any Jews there.
There are still Jews there, yes. There are Jews there. Not too many. There was a very nice community there under the Shah, under Mohammed Reza Shah. Under him, it was a very nice community. It was an affluent community. Many of them are now living in Great Neck, New York, and other places in the United States.
I know a lot of Persian Jews, so and they keep their Persian heritage really strong.
Yes,
like very, very strong, and they tend to marry in their own circle. Also, yes. They tend to very rarely step out of that. And in fact, there's actually there's a saying I heard about them, which is that all of them, almost without exception, are either dirt poor or filthy rich. Every one of them.
There was a gentleman who was a student of mine in a public school, and he became an Orthodox rabbi, and he married the female student of my wife from a yeshiva, and we were both invited to the wedding.
It's just a super sticker. That's just someone sharing their appreciation. So
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I appreciate that you appreciate it. And I mean that very seriously. I appreciate that. Anyway, so we went to the wedding, my wife and I, and we left the wedding at 1 a.m. And some of the students in the wedding were students of mine the next day in a Hebrew class in the morning. And when they didn't show up, I figured I knew why. All right. They took the whole day off after the wedding. And later I found the wedding ran until 5 a.m. So I understand in Great Britain, Jewish weddings also run like that. So I wasn't shocked that. But I do know people that came over the mountains. In fact, this particular student, it was very funny because when I at one point wrote a film strip on the Middle East for distribution in schools. And it was, I don't know, I don't think you can find it now. I was looking for it. It was done in the early 80s, so it's a long time ago. It was called The Middle East from Muhammad to Sadat. And we needed pictures. And the copyright, there are a lot of very beautiful pictures in National Geographic, and we couldn't get them because the copyrights are very strong, and they wanted to charge us $500 a picture, and the company wasn't going to pay for that, that kind of money. So what did we do? We ended up getting stamps, and we put stamps in. So, for example, when we made a stamp that the Ayatollah wants to, Khomeini was the Ayatollah, that he wants to, we put it in quotes, liberate Jerusalem from Jewish control, and we had a picture of the Al-Aqsa Mosque with barbed wire over it, which was on a Persian stamp. We had that stamp. Also, Sadat had been murdered, and he was praising Islambuli, who murdered him. So we had a picture of Islambuli in prison with a blood spot, because, of course, they executed Islambuli. So you have, we use the stamps. And these stamps were gotten for me by this Jewish fellow who had escaped from Iran.
So, Nurniath's wondering if you've thought of doing 40-minute lecture YouTube videos.
No. I don't. Maybe I don't know.
And Yethna is asking if you can start recording some of your talks and lectures, and Joe can upload them to a new channel and add commentary sometimes if he wishes. Wow! So the love is coming strong, Dad.
Thank you. I appreciate all of this. It's very nice of all of you, and I really appreciate it.
Crusader's asking whether Jews fast at their weddings. I will tell you that my father is also a rabbi. So if you have any questions, if you want to ask an Orthodox rabbi, your local Orthodox rabbi. He actually is one.
Jews don't fast they sort of. They fast before the wedding, and when they get on certain days they're not allowed. But on certain days they do fast up to the time of the actual marriage ceremony, and then we go into a private room, and they have to be in the room for anywhere, depending who's the rabbi, from 7 to 10 minutes. And in that room, usually there's food. And they eat in that room usually. Right. Anyway, yeah.
Right. So they usually, that we most days, unless the bride and groom will both fast until the ceremony. It's considered like a day, almost like a day like Yom Kippur for them.
Right.
So it's like a day of atonement for them. So because we don't eat on Yom Kippur, that's why they.
In fact, when the groom prays on the day of his wedding in the afternoon, he prays with the additionals that would be added on the day before Yom Kippur, normally by everybody. But for him alone on that day, and she alone too, she prays, they add that in. Yes, that is correct.
So, where were we on? I was asking. Oh, we were talking about Afghanistan and the pullout. So what I was wondering.
I'm saying, okay, so. You know what Guantanamo became famous because we used as a prison for these guys that we brought. That, by the way, incidentally, a half a dozen of the guys who we released, Obama released from Guantanamo base. Now those guys are hotshots in Afghanistan today. They've been restored by the Taliban. In any event, I believe we should have maintained we should have made a deal with them, and we should have maintained the base. So that we have and that base should have been like Guantanamo, it should have been American territory. And I think if we had played our cards right with them, we might have been able to do this. But the bottom line is that I think this was very poorly orchestrated. And not only because of Afghanistan, but because of the message it sends to the world. That is the concern. The concern is the message it sends to South Korea, again to Taiwan, the message it sends generally, the message it sends to the Saudis and to crucial states, Muscat, Oman, Bahrain. This, vis-a-vis Iran, this is not, it's not a good message. If America is weak, as I said, Ifet before, if America looks weak, I believe it is not in our best interest. We tried to be isolationists following World War I, and look what happened. I don't think at this point. Now, there are those who say, and I believe that some of them are on the left, that, well, America should, step back and let the world run itself, that we shouldn't be involved. But the historian in me screams, when you create a power vacuum, someone's going to walk into that, and it isn't going to be someone we like. And then we are going to suffer, and ultimately it will affect what we have as purchasing power. Ultimately, it's going to affect what we can do and can't do in the world. I don't believe the world will be a better place for this. That I honestly feel this, and I feel that most of you who are somewhat younger than I, or maybe a lot younger than I, this is going to be a problem. I mean, a problem for my children and my grandchildren as well as for you. Do we have to deal with this? It's a real concern.
My father,
I think this is symbolic of that.
Along that line, you made reference earlier to a story that I talked about probably like 4 to 6 weeks ago, but it bears repeating again, which is, I was talking about why it is, and you and I had discussed it earlier that day, and we were talking about why it is that Russia never faces any sort of terrorist activity. And the reason, and the story that's told, is that in the mid-'80s, there were 4 members of the Russian embassy who were taken hostage, and the Russians released a team that they call Alpha, and that team had either picked up the leader of the group or a brother of the leader of the group.
The brother.
And basically castrated him and started sending body parts one by one to the leader of the group. And they said, if you don't release the hostages immediately, we're going to find more. We'll be sending you more presents in the mail. And they were released that day. And no one messes with Russia ever since. Now, part of that... People have commented, and I actually talked with my audience about whether or not we should do that. Is that immoral, and is that unethical? And do our civil rights extend to people who are not on our soil and who are not Americans? And should we have to handcuff ourselves? And I've gotten into arguments with people in my audience where I basically said I don't see a problem with doing that. I know that I am in the minority. I know most Americans would not agree with me. But if it's someone who's not an American citizen and they're not American soil, I see no problem with doing it. And especially, and someone made a fair comparison. They were talking about how that you can sort of compare it. That innocent person, let's assume that the person we're picking up is a completely innocent person, and you don't have to be so brutal. You don't have to be so brutal. You don't have to castrate them and, and dismember them. But, you can basically send them a video of the guy being shot in the head and killed. And said, we're going to find the next. We're going to find your next. We're going to find your mother. Or you'll find your sister, or your daughters, or your sons, or whatever. So, you don't have to be so brutal about it. But at the same time, so I had this debate, and I said I don't believe that our civil rights should be used to inhibit us from being able to protect our civil rights. The purpose of our government is to protect us, and if that is the most effective way of protecting us, it's protect us so we can have our civil rights. And when you have a choice, it's almost like there's a famous question that people talk about where there's an ethical problem, where if there's a train that's going down a track 90 miles an hour. I don't know if you've ever heard this dilemma before. There's a train that's going down a track 90 miles an hour, and it's going to hit 4 people. There are 4 people. They're never going to see it. It's going to hit them. Or you can flip a switch, and it'll go off the track, and it's going to kill 1 person. Should you flip the switch or not? And the point is that you're getting involved, and now you're basically deciding to kill this 1 person for the purpose of saving 4 people who are probably going to die. So is that an ethical thing to do or not? And most people say that, yeah, that's an ethical thing. And to me, I don't see how this is any different when you have 4 hostages, or in this case, 1,000 hostages in Afghanistan. I don't see what on earth is wrong with basically going to the leader of the Taliban and kidnapping his family member and executing him and letting them know we are executing them, and that they're going to execute, and every day we're going to execute more and more until these hostages are released. Now, someone pointed out to me that it's more you can't really draw an analogy from Russia. And I said, this is the ramification is that for Russia, they're not dealing with any sort of terrorism for the last 35 years. So tell me that wasn't worth it, even if they didn't save 4 people. I would go further. I'll tell you this much. People might say I'm crazy. I would kill 10 foreigners to save 1 American. I don't even look at the same thing as a problem on the train. The goal of my government is to protect Americans. That's it. That's your goal. It's not to protect foreigners. And your job, your function, the same way a mother's function is to protect her children, a government's function, a healthy government, which Lord knows we don't have a healthy government, but a healthy government's function would be to protect its own citizenry. And that being the case, yeah, I would say execute 10 foreigners to protect 1 American. That's what a healthy government should be doing. It never will. And I know that I'm in the tiny minority to say such a thing, but to me, that's what fundamental purpose of government is. So, and the reason we have civil rights and civil liberties is to make sure government doesn't step on us. That's the reason we have those. Not to protect, not to just grant those freedoms to everyone else so that our government is inhibited from being able to protect us. That's like backwards. So that's my perspective on it. Someone made a fair point in counter to that. And their point in counter to that was, okay, fine. Russia didn't have any activity, come up after them for the next 35 years. Because they're Russia. I mean, everyone knows Russia's a bear, and everyone knows we're not like Russia. No one thinks we're like Russia. So people are a lot more afraid of Putin than they are of even probably Trump, but a million times more so than Biden. So just because it works for Putin and Russia doesn't mean or whoever was running Russia back then, 1985. I guess that was actually before. That was before that was probably during Brezhnev.
No, it was Gorbachev.
Gorbachev was in control at 84 or so?
85, yeah.
Yeah, so, okay. Even so, Gorbachev was a lot scarier in 1984 than any American leader. Perhaps, maybe Trump was close, but everyone knows Trump's not going to be there forever. That there's going to be someone weak, some weak pawn that's going to come up down the road after him, even if he would have won now. But anyway, my point is, the point to our government is to protect us and not to use our own civil rights as a basis to say, well, we can't protect you because of civil rights of people who are not Americans. To me, that's ridiculous. It's retarded. But if you want to weigh in with your thoughts on that and your points about that.
Well, I certainly think that it's effective. There's no question it's effective. As far as it being moral, I do feel the United States government has responsibility to protect Americans. And you could say by whatever means necessary to protect Americans. It was very interesting. And this was a film. And I read later that it wasn't exactly like this, but it was very, very well done. Sean Connery, who, of course, played
James Bond.
James Bond, right?
The original.
And he also played an interesting role there's a story that was written by Rudyard Kipling, The Man Who Would Be King. It's set in Afghanistan. And they thought he was the son of Alexander. And a very nice movie. The only problem was they were supposed to be speaking Pashto, and I understood them because they were speaking Arabic. It was filmed in Morocco. But anyway, that was another thing. In any event, he also played another role. It was a role of a bandit who kidnapped an American woman, and this bandit demanded $1 million. This was in 1905 or something. And they came over to the actor playing Teddy Roosevelt while he was skeet shooting. And they come in and he said, "What do we do? Do we give him the $1 million? Mr. President, what do we do?" And he said, "Petty Karras," that's the woman's name. I still remember the line, "Petty Karras alive or Rasuli dead." And then boom, he shoots the skeet. And they go on again. And of course, Sean Connery released her. I mean, I don't know that it exactly happened quite that way, but I believe the woman was released. I think actually they sent the Marines, and the woman was released by the Marines.
So where do you stand on this scale compared to like the hard line I take, where it's America first when it comes to?
I it is America first. I certainly think that kind of action works. If I had to make the call, I don't know. I might make the call. I question it. It's a very difficult call. I really don't want to come down on this too strongly, one way or the other. But I do really feel that we do have to defend our citizens, absolutely. And
so Crusader's asking if Afghanistan was
Adrianople.
What's Adrianople?
378. That's when I believe maybe 79. That's when the Emperor Valens was captured went to fight the barbarians, and he was taken prisoner and he died, and the else came in. And that's considered to be the signal of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. That's what this person, I assume, is alluding to by using that term. Anyway, what?
Can you tell us a funny story of good Lawgic as a kid?
I have to think. He wasn't funny. He was serious. He was serious. Oh yeah, I'm gonna.
You never got my humor. That's really what it was.
Oh, I have a story. I have a story. Oh,
there we go.
Switch. You remember the story? Switch. With Mr. P. I'm not going to say the name. This is Lashon Hara. All right. They were in school, in a Jewish school, and there was a teacher who was not effective. So they divided the class into 2 teams. And they had expressions. Mr. So-and-so, you're acting stupid.
No.
Or I don't know. You'll know the expression. I don't remember what they were.
It was our English teacher.
Don't use the name, really.
I know, I understand. Our English teacher used to use the same tired expressions over and over and over again when he would yell at us. We would troll him in ways that are somewhat embarrassing today when I look back on it, but we would really troll him for the purpose of agitating him. And everyone in our class developed their own niche as to how they would try and make him lose his mind. And it's purely because he was so ineffective at keeping us in control, and because he would use the same tired expressions over and over again, and they were unusual expressions, weird things for anyone to ever say, and he would say it over and over again. Like, he'd be like, you're transparent as glass, I can see right through you. He yelled at this other kid that he had a holier than thou attitude. When he got mad at us, he would call us by our last names. He'd be like, Mr. Neerman, Mr. Goldstein, whatever. So sometimes, and you could gauge his mood. Sometimes he'd say, shut up, and sometimes he would say, be quiet. And so we actually made a list. My class made a list of his different expressions. I don't know how I ended up telling this story. This was supposed to be you telling a story about me. I don't think they meant high school. Well, anyway, I'll finish the story up quickly. So I and another kid chose teams, and we sat and basically on 2 sides of the room, and we made a list of expressions. And some of the expressions would be a walk, a single, a double. The tougher it was, and some would be outs. And the idea was, when our team was up, we wanted to motivate him to yell at us in a way that he's going to use expressions that were base hits. And when the other team's up, you want to motivate him to say expressions that were outs. So, and it's tough because be quiet is an out, but shut up is a double. So you sort of really need to know what's going to set him off to say, shut up, rather than just be quiet. Like, you have to gauge his mood, and that's the whole thing. So, and the longer the expression was, obviously, the more value it has. And so we ended up, and we had a scorekeeper there who would scream change every time a half inning was over, so we would know, because he's keeping track, double, single, out, double, single, and we're just like picking at him and like bothering him with like this question or that question. My thing is, I used to sit like right in front of him. Like I would sit right in front of him, like I feel embarrassed now telling this. I used to sit right in front of him, like off to the side, and whenever I wanted to just make sure he'd be busy yelling at someone. And I would always shoot my hand up into his face, because I sat like so close to him, and I would scream out the word question to make sure that I got his attention, as if my hand in his face didn't get his attention sufficiently. So I would always just go like, question, like that, like right in front of his face. And he'd be in the middle of yelling at someone, and I'd just scream out, question, and he would tell me, Mr. Neiman, put your hand down. And this was like, I would do that 3 times a class. And it would always be like, he'd always be busy yelling at someone. And it's always when he's busy yelling at someone that I was screaming my hand question, because he'd start railing and saying, certain kids who know, and they know who they are. And I would always raise my hand, and once in a while he would call on me when I would do that. And I would always say, I just want to make sure, you're not talking about me, that you realize how good I've been behaving recently. Because I figure, that's how you troll someone. I was pretty good at trolling. Anyway, so we ended up keeping score. We had a scorekeeper there. Every half inning, the scorekeeper would scream out, change, and he'd be racking up single, double, out, double, single, and then 3 outs. He'd scream change, and when he's getting that, so like sit down was like an out. So like my opponent, the captain of the other team, like when he saw that this teacher was yelling at some of my team, and we're racking up base hit. So he gets half the room to stand up and start screaming, we're standing, just to get him to say the word sit down, because sit down was an out. And and instead he's like, I don't want to hear from you now, shut up. And I'm like, yes, double. And when he finally ran out of breath, he was screaming at this one guy on my team, and he was racking up base hit. And he finally got his breath. And I was like, Mr. You know what it is? It's his holier than thou attitude. Like I pointed the kid who was yelling at, and he goes, Joe, for once you're right. It's your holier than thou attitude. And we all start screaming, yay, home run. And yeah, so that was a baseball game that we created as purely a way of trolling a teacher. Do not do that at home, kids. Anyway.
By the way, now I'm going to add to you. I'm going to tell you something. 2 or 3 years after this, I took a position as a principal of a Jewish school, and I wrote up a teacher's handbook, and I described this in there with a warning that you need to maintain control, not repeat things, etc., and so forth. I wrote a half a page on this, telling the teachers that they should avoid putting themselves in such a position that this kind of thing could happen, because the boys are very bright, and they will come up with ingenious ways of, I didn't use the word trolling, but of taking advantage of your weaknesses. Anyway, and we never had it happen. Anyway.
My father used me as a role model of like, this is what will happen if you do not keep your class in proper control. Without using my name, obviously. I know you would never use my name. You would never throw me out there like that. But I was his inspiration for that. Let me make sure I didn't miss any super chats here. Because, yes, Engineer Records says, by that logic, can the government harvest foreigners' organs to save Americans? No, you cannot. Because the reason you're doing it is to punish people for the wrongs they're committing. My general philosophy, and I like your question, Engineer Record. I don't think that's a bad faith question at all. I think it's a good faith question, because you're basically saying, if you're putting America first, so in that case, why don't you say, well, we need to protect Americans, so we're going to use the liver of this person from Indonesia to help save an American life. And that would make sense, but it's not what I'm saying, and that's different. The reason it's different is because I believe that our primary responsibility is to treat all of humanity with respect. They dictate how we treat them, though. If they treat our citizens as if they're chattel, as if they're pawns, as if they're supposed to be abused, as if they're below humanity, as if they're not free humans, they are choosing our response for them. And this is how I deal with people on a one-to-one basis. I always start off that you should deal with everyone with honor and dignity and respect and mutual respect, and you should never look down on anyone, no matter what their station is in life, no matter how much money they have, or anything about, obviously their skin, their gender, race, whatever. None of that should ever factor into your equation, purely based on how they act to you. And you should start off giving them the benefit of the doubt and the assumption that they're going to treat you properly, and you should treat them with the utmost respect and dignity. But when they show that they're not going to treat you with that basic dignity, they are directing you how you should respond. And that if you do not respond that way, I think you're a fool. I think you're an idiot. I think you're being suckered. You're being taken advantage of. And you're begging to be taken advantage of. So that's how I deal on a one-to-one basis, on a micro level, and that's how I think that's the only way I can understand how a country on a macro level can deal in a way that's going to protect their own citizenry. So that was a great question. Great question. That's my take on it. But I'll go, Dad, if you want to weigh in with your thoughts on that.
No, I have to agree with you that I think that if you don't respond to provocation, especially if you're a country, I mean, that in terms of other situations and families and other, that may be different. But if a nation is provoked and it does not respond, it will be provoked more in the future. It has to respond. And the concept of turning the other cheek does not work when you're dealing with power relationships around the globe.
You're begging to be picked on the same way that teacher was begging to be picked on.
Examples of this. The classic one is the appeasement of Hitler at Munich in September of 1938. It's the classic example. Now, there's some revisionist historians who claim that Chamberlain knew what he was doing and he wanted to build up and so forth and so on. But others say very clearly that the Wehrmacht would have thrown Hitler out. They were waiting, but he became so popular after that they couldn't. I mean, so the bottom line is that if you don't deal with something, it's like if you have a disease, you have to try to treat it immediately before it gets worse. If you have a cancer, you have to deal with the cancer as soon as you can, because otherwise it's going to. And this is true.
You mentioned turning the other cheek, and when I was on Nick Rekieta, so he gave me an interpretation of that a couple of weeks ago when I was on his show. He gave me an interpretation of that, which was very different from anything I'd ever heard before, and I was like, you know what, that's a perspective that I can understand a lot of people getting behind as far as turning the other cheek. And he claimed that historically that someone would be slapped in an offensive way, so they would take the right hand and slap the person's left cheek. And when he's saying that the phrase turn the other cheek is to basically say you turn your face the other way, so now you're sort of almost defiantly, you're being defiant, silently defiant, and standing up and saying, you can hit me, it's not going to do anything to me. Like you're showing your strength, and as opposed to saying, yes, please hit me again, the way someone, weak would do, it's almost saying like, no, that you can't, there's nothing you do to touch me. And I'm going to turn your other cheek, and I'm going to make it harder for you to hit me. Now you have to use your other hand to slap that side of my face.
That might work in personal relations, doesn't work in statecraft. I don't believe it works in statecraft.
I agree with you. I agree with you. Because, I mean, it might depend on the culture, though. Don't you think it might depend on the culture? Because I think that Western culture reacts to that very differently than a Middle Eastern culture would. Like, I think a Middle Eastern mindset, you've told me in the past, a Middle Eastern mindset sees that as weakness.
Absolutely.
And it should be exploited. As opposed to...
I think it does. I think Middle East, I would venture to say so far, generally the Far East also. The Far East also.
The Far East also, you think they look at as weakness?
Weakness, yeah. But look at Japan before World War II, what they did. Look what they did. Look how they treated even prisoners of war, the Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
And look at, there was one Japanese person who was on a particular island. I read it recently, but I've forgotten, and I had read it years ago too, but I still forgot. He didn't want to surrender, and he was the Philippines. And they had to get his former commander to come and tell him, no, the war's been over 20 years before he would surrender, this fellow.
So we only have a few minutes left. I don't want to keep because I know it's already almost midnight here, and I don't want to keep I don't want to keep my father here too long because it's
getting late. Yeah,
it's getting late. So I wanted to ask you: you think that we should have a presence still in Afghanistan?
Yes, at least at the airbase. Absolutely.
Just at the airbase.
At least. I'm not saying more. They might need more to defend the airbase, but we need a presence. Can we control Afghanistan? No, it's not going to happen. The only way you control Afghanistan would be to really have work with the local chiefs. And I don't think, and I mean this, a lot of people are going to get upset with this. I don't think that we should try to impose democracy. This is a whole other discussion. But democracy has to be learned. Every time, practically, I can't think of an example where we imposed democracy and it worked, except maybe Japan, maybe. And that was a whole thing. That was because the emperor went along with it, and they worshipped the emperor at that point in 45 and 50. The bottom line is generally you can't. A democracy is something you have to learn, you have to appreciate, and that is one of the big problems of what's going on in the school system today. Because if they don't teach democracy, we're going to lose democracy.
So wait, I'm curious. I'm curious on this topic. Yeah, go on.
Let me just make one quick thing, and then we're going to run out of time. But anyway, Harding Carter, who was the servant he worked for, Jimmy Carter, was on the phone with a general on inauguration day at 10 to 12. In 10 minutes, Reagan's going to be president. And he's discussing, because then they had the whole hostage business. They were trying to leave, get them out of Iran. And they were going to leave. The Iranians let him go. And he's going, General, what's going on? The general's giving a report. He says, I'll get back to you. He calls him at 2-3 minutes after 12. I don't exactly. It's in his book, if you want to look it up. Harding Carter's book. And he said, General, what's going on with this? The general says, Mr. Carter, I can't tell you. What do you mean you can't tell me? You told me 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes ago, you're a special assistant to the President of the United States. Now you're a private citizen. Ronald Reagan is president. The army has to be loyal to the Constitution. As long as we have that, we have democracy. The day the army becomes loyal to anyone, whoever may be, except the Constitution, we're in deep water.
You're referring to General Mark Milley and how he sidestepped.
Right. Well, that's he's one example, but any example, Milley or Miley, whatever his name is pronounced, he's a problem. He's definitely. I think he.
Oh yeah. I think he needs to be put up against the wall. That
guy. Well, fired or worse. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, you said that. I know you said that. And I said fired and lose his pension. You said that's all. We had that conversation. Anyway.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you: is democracy inconsistent with Sharia law?
Yes.
Democrat. So, because that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, how I can't imagine them ever having a democratic republic, even in the place that's going to be run under Sharia law.
Sharia law is not democratic. Of course, I shouldn't maybe point it out on here either. Halakha is also not democratic.
Right.
That's true. Religious law is not democratic. And certainly these religious laws. I don't think canon law is democratic either. Well, I don't know it too well, but
thank you, Daddy Lawgic, for joining this evening. Enjoyed your insight, extremely informative and interesting. Well, there you go.
Thank you so much, Iris. I very much appreciate that.
Iris, and I don't know how I missed that. That was up there a while ago, and I want to make sure I didn't. I know I got one more from Crusader. I just want to scroll up and make sure I didn't miss anything else up here. If I missed any super chats, I'm really sorry. I don't think I missed any other than this one here from Crusader, who's saying, would restoring the Afghan monarchy have been more successful?
I don't know too much about that monarchy. I think the monarchy worked mostly because the tribal chiefs approved of the monarch. Again, it's tribal state. And if the tribal states, if you can work with the chiefs, the locals, you can run the country. But the country itself even is a conglomerate. There are 3 sections in there. There are different groups. As I said, there are 2 main languages. They don't even speak the same language. Now, the languages are like Spanish and Italian related. Mm-hmm. But, it's a Pashto and Dari. They're very similar, but they are different. They're slightly different cultures. I've read that recently. I was reading about this.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of it would depend on the personality. The same way it's like, Trump is very popular with half the country and very unpopular with the other half. And I'm sure that it could be the same way with other. I'm sure it could be the same way with other people also. It's like, depending on who you ask as to like their popularity is going to really vary depending on whether the person is hardline or less or more moderate, and the individuals who are in favor of one position versus another. So Crusader says, thanks for answering all my questions. Good logic.
Yeah. Thank you, Crusaders Harrison. Thank you.
Anyway, I want to thank all you for the kindness you showed my father and me tonight, and I hope that I hope to have my father back on soon. I do want to let you all know that tonight is Thursday night. As you know, I normally stream from Sunday to Thursday. I'm going to try to get on Saturday night. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do it, but I'm going to try to get on Saturday night. It might not be 10 o'clock start. It might be a little bit later because Sabbath is going to end and it takes me a while to put a show together. So it might be a little bit later, but I'm going to try and get on Saturday night because next week I'm going to be on Sunday, Monday, and I'm going to be off. Sorry, I'm going to be on Sunday. And then not Monday, not Tuesday. I will not be here Monday or Tuesday next week. So instead of, since I'm missing out Monday and Tuesday, I'm going to try to get in here Saturday night, maybe like 10:30 or so. So I'm going to try to put together a show. If any of you want to join me on that show, DM me because it's probably easier if I have a guest on. So I don't want to put my father out and have him come back a second time, like on a couple of nights. But
no, I can't do that. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, you've been great, Dad. I really appreciate you coming on here. You're a phenomenal guest. And thank you so much. So if anyone want to DM me on Twitter at Nearman Joe, so hit me up if you're interested in joining me on a stream, especially if you have a topic or two that you would think would be like really timely and interesting. So all the more so, I'm very open to sharing my mic, particular on Saturday nights. So look for me Saturday night, sometime probably 10:30. That's what I'm hoping to start, probably by 10:30. And if not, then if I'm not on, I'll certainly, God willing, be on Sunday evening at 10 p.m. So till then, have a great weekend, and I thank you all. Godspeed, and thank you again, Dad.